Hello, back as promised. Go ahead and continue our studies here. Alright, welcome. Yes, we have landed here in the land of Persia. We're talking about the rise of Persia, and it's also referred to as Euphrates, or the region of Euphrates. Oh, do you know what they call it? Trans-Euphrates, okay? So as Jerusalem and Judah is crumbling, okay, we have this rise of the Trans-Euphrates kings, and really the kingdoms of Persia and their lineages. So before we get into a little bit further in their role, where we left off with King Cyrus the Great, who was taking up the responsibility by prophetic word to go ahead and rebuild Jerusalem and Judah, more specifically the house of the Lord, or the temple. So that's where we left off, and we were kind of teeter-tottering on whether the full fruition of that, or the completion of the temple, would be a good idea, and would it cause any problems, more or less. That's what we were deciding based off of the context quote that we have. So we're going to see how this plays out, because the time span at which this takes place actually covers a lot of time. It wasn't just King Cyrus going ahead and taking up this responsibility, because when he agreed to this, he was actually quite late in his reign, and he was getting older. Okay, it doesn't talk about his death or anything like that, but it does talk about the kings that come after King Cyrus and what they have proposed of this idea. So without further ado, let me get into this introduction quote, and we are going to learn about the transpiration of events. So I have here, "If any young men come for Mary or Kitty, send them in, for I am quite at leisure." And this is from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and it's a quote by Mrs. Bennet. And with this, I forgot how I referenced this quote last time, or what context I phrased this in. I don't think it was correct, whatever I said. But now we're actually taking a little bit more literal context meaning from this quote. And what this reminds me of here is asking your parents, or when we were young, right? We would ask our parents something or for something when they were in a good mood, right? We would make sure they were in that good mood to go ahead and request of them, or ask them to do something for us, or help us with something, or you need something, that type of energy, okay? So this is similar in the sense of Mrs. Bennet, right? She's quite at leisure, she's in a happy mood, so she wants to go ahead and take on the task of entertaining for young men that come for Mary or Kitty. So she is dead set on finding her daughters a husband, and since she's in the best mood, she's at leisure, she said this is a great time, right, to go ahead and deal with this task, right? Something that is a little maybe uncomfortable for parents, or strenuous, something that doesn't really happen anymore, finding your children's husbands, but it was something that took place at the time of this quote. So without diving too deep into Pride and Prejudice, we can think of this moment of striking while the iron is hot, right? When the glad tidings are really good and everybody is doing well. So God has actually been endowing this Persian nation, right, the Trans-Euphrates region, with great kings and great power, and King Cyrus was really one of those kings that was great, like David, okay, in his conquering. He not only conquered nations, but he's transformed them and allowed the people at which he's conquering, right, the people of the nations, to rebuild and take power and take ownership of their nations while still being in control. So God is allowing this, right? He's permitting this, and he's really encouraging, he's seeing the growth and the strength that was provided by the Lord of King Cyrus. He's seeing him transform into this great ruler, and he's like, this would be a good candidate for me to go ahead and use to build my temple. That's really what that was. He endowed him with power so he can go ahead and ask something of him and really demand or command by prophecy, by way of prophecy, this legacy for King Cyrus. And this was towards the end of his legacy. He was already very powerful and already a very great ruler. So this was something just to kind of finish him off, if you will. Like, that was terrible wording, but to go ahead and put an end cap on his rule. So with that, right, God is using him in his best moment to go ahead and make him a good candidate for this process. Although, once the other kings come into power after the reign of King Cyrus, that spark and that drive that was assigned to King Cyrus based on prophecy was kind of lost, and people were getting a little bit upset and a little bit confused as to why they were doing this. Taking people from their great nations of Trans-Euphrates and moving them back into Jerusalem, when Jerusalem and Judah already had great rulers and great kingdoms. They were getting a little bit jealous, if you will, not jealous, but protective over what they built, knowing that Judah and Jerusalem were great nations in the past. Are we going to go ahead and restore that at our own expense? So this is the drama that's brewing in here. So I'm going to begin here with chapter 3, part 2. And it says here, when the 7th month came, the Israelites had settled in their towns. The people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then they gave money to the masons and carpenters, and gave food and drink and olive oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, so that they would bring cedar logs by sea from Lebanon to Joppa, as authorized by King Cyrus, king of Persia. Okay, so we have, again, that reunification, people coming together as one, and they have quite a society and a system. Okay, they had a lot of wealth coming from Persia, but it was also of the Israelites themselves, right? They had to give a lot of their own money and their own wealth to go ahead and create this system of what am I trying to say? Trade. It's not trade, but import, right? Imports and exports to try and get wood to the nation to go ahead and build the house and build up the city. And remember, we talked about the fireless lodgings, right? How this cedar, right, was very hard to come by. So wood, it was also the landscape and just the way that they were positioned within the I don't know, words, okay, just forgive me here. Within their land, right, there was not a lot of wood, not a lot of trees, so they had to really create all these little economies to go ahead and get wood to be shipped to them. So they were growing, right? They were unifying, they were growing, they had things set in place, they had wealth, they had goods to go ahead and really rebuild the kingdom that was utterly destroyed and, barren. Nobody lived there anymore. People were coming back and gelling together. And of course people take notice of this, correct? When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building the temple for their Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the families of Israel and said, "Let us help you build, because like you we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us." All right, so we have a little moment here, whether this was right of Zerubbabel and Joshua to go ahead and reject the joining of their enemies, right? Simply and plainly stated here that they are their enemies, okay? So they were not going to be so easy and so generous to invite them, right, into their communities and invite them to join in the worship of the Lord. even though that does seem like the peaceful and correct thing to do, to go ahead and, welcome everybody. Oh, they're worshiping God now? Come on and join us, right? That seems like the right thing and the best thing to do. But again, they're still classified here in chapter 4, line 1, as their enemies. And it may have been that the enemies themselves, right, of Judah and Benjamin, whomever they were, they probably saw the progress, and knowing of the past of Judah and Israel, they wanted to have their hand in the pot. They wanted to have some kind of relation, right, with the nation that they could see was growing and was developing once again into this great power. And as you can see, they've been converted as well. So the point of conflict with them really was the differentiation in religion and in worship. So now that they are worshiping the same God, they're like, let us be a part of it. And of course, just the way that the families were like, nope, sorry about that. Whether that was the right thing or not, it does not say. God had no specific view on or input on that at that time. Okay. So they said, nope, we're going to do this. This is king of Persia. It was his command. We're just going to do it all by ourselves. Okay, no need. Anyways, the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah, to make them afraid to go on building. They bribed officials to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Okay, so there's the issues, right? So since they were rejected, right, now they want to retaliate. And actually that sign of retaliation is a sign that the intentions were never good to begin with. If there is that retaliation, then you can see that they had another idea when asking Jerusalem to invite them in, I guess you could say. So there was some not so good intentions that caused for a bit of retaliation. And so it says here that this was frustrated, right, from King Cyrus, who we spoke about, all the way down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So again, this highlights the process and how long this process took place. I did actually look up the line of kings just so I could understand here. So let's see here, 59 to 30, 530, 529 to 522. It's a little confusing because I can't tell here. The numbers go backwards, right? They start large when you're talking about 559 to 530, which was Cyrus's the Great Reign. It's not that long, 29 years it looks like. And then 529 to 522, we have Cambyses, his son. 522, we have Smerdis, his brother. And then we have 521 to 486, Darius the Great. Okay. Anyways, I'll include this link. I'm going to include two links because following here, it's called the Achaemenid dynasty, right, where we're talking about Persia and the Trans-Euphrates. This is what we're talking about. So it goes Cyrus, his son, and then a brother, and then Darius after that. And the plans were frustrated until then. But the time frame is not that long, 559 to 586. It looks like it's less than 100 years that this took place. Okay, I guess, a pretty long time, but not too long. Okay, anyways, we're going to jump to talk about Darius in a second, but we're going to follow who is ruling after Darius. We have Xerxes the first and Artaxerxes the first. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, which I probably am, but we're going to jump, okay? And I'll include the links in a little bit. But here it says, having issues, frustrate your plans. Okay, at the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, this is after Darius, but we're going to go back and talk about Darius in a second. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they had lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, which was the king after, it says Bishlam, Mithraim, Mithridath, and Tabeel, and the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Axioteres. The letter was written in Aramaic script and in the Aramaic language, and it states a portion of it. I'll read a portion of it here. But they're saying, "We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls restored, you will be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates." All right, so they're putting the little whispers in his ear, letting him know, it's like, we don't, first of all, where did this ruling come from? Why are we helping Judah and Jerusalem? Because by this time, the prophecy is pretty much lost. Like, they're not really sure why they're helping this city rebuild using their tax money, relocating their people to go ahead and restore. They're saying it makes no sense to us. They're also letting this king know that, Judah and Jerusalem were very, very great at a time, and if they become great once again, we could no longer cease to exist, in the sense that they may come and attack us or overpower us in whichever way. So there was that little bit of selfishness. Remember, we literally quoted that on the first part of Ezra. Here's that selfishness coming into play. Although Cyrus is long gone, right, the practicing and the carrying out of this task has been rooted in selfishness, even though the intention was very pure to start. So now we have here the human error coming into play. And then the king also sent this reply. He's like, "Be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests?" So the king is in agreement. He's like, "You're right, this is dumb. I don't know why we're helping this nation become great again, even though in truth they are just rebuilding the temple. But around the temple, the town is also growing. It's redeveloping into the great kingdom that it once was." So he's like, "That's correct. We should nix this." So it says, "Thus the work of the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia." So this line here causes a little bit of confusion because we're talking about here the kings after after Darius. But then now we're jumping back into Darius, and we're going to talk about the events that took place during his reign. So it's a little bit confusing. People were commenting, thinking that they maybe misnamed the kings or got confused in the timeline when they were recording the Bible or something like that. But it's very rare that the Bible actually makes such a great error like that. It's more so that they were referencing, these letters. Okay, they had these letters, they had the names. That was not the issue. They were referencing these letters, and then it was like a reordering of events that takes place. Sometimes that happens, and that is actually a much more frequent occurrence in the Bible. They just reorder things to go ahead and introduce, here are the problems, right? And this is, what was happening now, but let's go back and figure out why this starts. Something like that. I know I didn't explain that in full, but I will attach the article so you can read the confusion, because when I read this, I was confused as well. Why were these kings mentioned? And then Darius. And something too that I noticed just looking at the line, it does have Darius first, and then Xerxes, and then Axioteres, so whom we talked about. And then there's also Darius the second, Axioteres the second, and Axioteres the third. But we are ruling that out because the timeline is too late. Okay, for Ezra to be around, it needed to be during the time of Darius the first, and possibly Cyrus. But I digress. I'll attach the links so you can see what I'm talking about when it comes to the confusion, and there's actually a pretty good theologian explanation that explains that little confusion there. But as we can see, right, nothing is ever perfect. The intention was there, and then it gets a little bit lost. The selfishness starts to come in, and people want to hold what they have for themselves. It's a fact, a human nature fact. But we haven't even talked about the prophet Ezra, and we'll get into that in just a few sessions here and finish up the book definitely before the end of the week. So I appreciate you guys listening in and staying with me during the brain foggy moments, and have a great rest of your week. I'll talk to you again very, very soon.